The Fokker D.XXI can hardly be considered one of the best fighters of the Second World War. Nevertheless, the D.XXI was used with such success by Finland that it achieved one of the best kill ratios of that period. Fokker aircraft. Normally we associate this name with Germany and the biplane and triplane designs of the First World War. But in fact, Anthony Fokker, the founder, was born in the Dutch East Indies and grew up in the Netherlands. He moved to Berlin in 1910 and would end up working with the Germans during the Great War. But in 1919, after the war, he returned to the Netherlands and moved his factory to Amsterdam. What followed was Fokker's golden period. During the 1920s and early 1930s, the Dutch company dominated commercial aviation, especially in the US. In the second half of the 1930s, the trademark designs of the Fokker company were becoming obsolete, and the company suffered economically. And it is in this less than ideal period that the origins of the Fokker D.XXI lie. In 1935, the Netherlands East Indies Army issued a requirement for a new aircraft that had to have a speed above 410 km per hour, a fixed undercarriage, wood and metal construction, and an armament of 1 heavy and 2 light machine guns. Its main role was to be an air superiority fighter. Fokker answered and the project was awarded to Erich Schatzky, a new engineer who had worked with Junkers and Lufthansa and had fled Germany due to its Jewish origins. The D.XXI was of typical Fokker construction, with the fuselage made of steel tubes covered in fabric, the moving parts also covered in fabric, the wings made of wood, the nose and the engine mountings made of metal. It was powered by a Bristol Mercury 8 air-cooled radial engine that could develop 830 horsepower. The first flight was on February 27, 1936, and several tests ensued. It fulfilled all the Army's requirements, but changes in Dutch defense policy meant that the fighter production ceased to be a priority, and for a while things looked bleak for Fokker's new design. But Finland came to the rescue when they favored the design in their 1936 fighter contest, and on November 18 Finland ordered 7 D.XXIs and bought a license to produce several more, becoming its first customer. This Finnish interest seemed to renew the Dutch one, and so the Netherlands also placed an order for 36 Fokker's D.XXIs in 1937. Denmark and Spain followed with their own orders. Nevertheless, the D.XXI never saw combat for the Republic of Spain, since the plant where it was going to be produced was overrun by nationalist forces. The D.XXIs operated by these countries had small differences. The Dutch version was lightened and had improved aerodynamics. It had the 2 fuselage-mounted machine guns moved to the wings, saving the weight caused by the synchronization gear. The Finnish D.XXI had a modified landing gear so that it could be fitted with skis. It retained the 2 fuselage-mounted machine guns. One aircraft was fitted with 2 wing-mounted 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The Danish planned to use a pair of 20mm Madsen cannons instead of the wing-mounted machine guns, but it seems their D.XXIs were never equipped to that standard. The D.XXI entered service with the Dutch Army's aviation branch in the summer of 1938. Dutch pilots quickly found that due to its light structure and lack of self-sealing tanks, armor and retractable landing gear, the D.XXI was quite light and consequently a good climber, reaching 5,000 meters in 6 minutes and 36 seconds. It also had a good ceiling of 11,000 meters. About the D.XXI's handling, Dutch pilot Henk van Overvest had this to say. Flying it is pleasant and easy and the handling is good, but the D.XXI is not a beginner's plane. If the pilot is careless and pulls the stick too sharply, the airplane rolls to the left and goes into a spin. This error is very often made at the top of a looping when you lose too much speed. Its good vertical ability meant that the Fokker D.XXI was used more in an interceptor role than as a pure air superiority aircraft. During the second half of 1939, the Dutch used them to intercept numerous bombers and reconnaissance aircraft that entered their territory and violated their neutrality. It was in one of those cases that the first recorded air victory by a D.XXI happened, when on November 19, 1939 a German Heinkel 111 bomber was brought down. On April 9, 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and the Danes quickly surrendered. Some D.XXIs were destroyed on the ground while attempting to take off. The remaining didn't see combat and were later confiscated by the Germans. When the invasion of the Netherlands came on May 10, 1940, 28 Fokker D.XXIs were available to the Dutch. The 3 squadrons equipped with the fighter fought valiantly, shooting down 10 aircraft despite being heavily outnumbered. 20 D.XXIs were lost to all causes, and the remaining ones were burned on the ground after the Dutch surrendered. However, the Fokker D.XXI's story would be incomplete without visiting the conflict in which it shone the most, the Winter War. While the world had its eyes set on Germany, Stalin demanded that Finland give up territory near Leningrad in exchange for a large area of wilderness on the northern part of the border. Finland refused, and the Soviet Union promptly invaded on November 30, 1939. With a population of 183 million and a standing army of 1,600,000 men, Soviet leadership was convinced that Finland would surrender in less than 2 weeks. In contrast, at the time, Finland had a population of 3,337,000 men. What followed was one of the most gruesome wars ever recorded. Finnish troops made use of their superior knowledge of the terrain and in winter warfare to inflict heavy casualties on the Soviet Red Army by engaging mostly in guerrilla warfare. Temperatures in the -30°C range and sometimes well below that value resulted in an even higher attrition rate among the ill-prepared Soviets. The Red Army was initially ground to a bloody halt, but after a quick lull in the fighting, the renewed Soviet attacks would eventually overwhelm the highly outnumbered Finnish troops. If the fighting on the ground was one-sided in numbers, in the air it was even worse. The Soviet Union amassed an incredible number of aircraft for the attack on Finland, with the number estimated to be well above 3,000 flying machines. To face this, Finland only had 114 serviceable aircraft. When it came to modern fighters, only 35 D.XXIs were available, all transferred to the Lentolaivue 24 squadron that was deployed to the Karelian Isthmus. The Fokker D.XXI proved to be quite a good bomber interceptor. Its good climbing ability allowed it to timely catch enemy bombers, and as Soviet SB and DB-3 bombers didn't have armor or self-sealing tanks, the 4 rifle-caliber machine guns were more than enough to bring them down. Initially, Soviet bombers flew unescorted, and, consequently, Finnish pilots were able to exact a heavy toll while taking negligible losses. December was a highly successful month for the Finns, but during January, despite taking very few losses, D.XXI pilots were forbidden from engaging Soviet fighters after several close calls. The most advanced Soviet fighter at the time was the I-16, and, regarding it, Ilmari Utilainen, future 94 victory ace, said the following: "The D.XXI was our best fighter in 1939, but the Polikarpov I-16 was faster, more maneuverable, and had armor protecting the pilot. I had the opportunity to fly a captured I-16. It could reach 398 km per hour at low altitudes, and could turn very well. I really liked that plane. In comparison, the Fokker couldn't even reach 320 km per hour at low altitudes, and it didn't have armor protecting the pilot. Nevertheless, it had a good diving capability and was a stable platform. I think it was our training that made the Fokker a winner in the Winter War." Besides the direct comparison, possibly the biggest problem was that Finland was unable to replace any aircraft losses, but the Soviet Union could. After a lull in the conflict, February saw a change in tactics by the Soviets, both on the ground and in the air, where fighter escorts were added to the bombing runs, making life much harder for the Finns. Naturally, results decreased. In March, D.XXIs were primarily used in strafing missions to try to deal with the worsening situation on the ground. The situation became dire, and Finland accepted the harsh terms of peace proposed by the Soviets. Hostilities came to an end on March 13, 1940. During the 3 months and 1 week of the Winter War, D.XXI pilots flew 2,477 sorties, claiming 127 aircraft shot down, of which 100 were bombers. 12 Finnish pilots became aces while flying the Fokker aircraft. A further 23 achieved victories with the D.XXI and later became aces while flying other airplanes. Finland lost 12 D.XXIs to all causes. Of those, 9 were lost in combat. In total, Finland claimed 521 Soviet aircraft during the Winter War. 207 by the Ilmavoimat, the Finnish Air Force, and 314 by anti-aircraft fire. The Soviet Union lost between 261 and 579 aircraft according to their own records. The latter number is the more recent, after revision of Soviet records. Finland lost 62 aircraft. If we look at the numbers on the ground, things don't look much better for the Soviets, with Finland's casualties estimated at around 70,000 men and the Soviet Union's at least 350,000. But despite all these numbers, the Winter War was a Soviet victory, albeit a very costly one. Negotiations with Moscow forced Finland to cede a large amount of territory, almost 11% of its original size. But the Finnish love story with the Fokker D.XXI didn't end with the Winter War. Following this conflict, Finland produced 50 more D.XXIs, now with the Pratt & Whitney Twin Wasp Junior engine. This was the only D.XXI variant to be produced in significant numbers and was actually a downgrade in terms of performance. But this power plant change was made out of necessity, since Britain needed the Mercury engines for their own aircraft. These new 50 fighters, along with the surviving ones, would participate in the Continuation War, the Second Finnish-Soviet War, when Finland joined Germany in its invasion of the Soviet Union. D.XXIs were used by the Finns until they left the war under the 1944 armistice. After the war, it was used as a training aircraft until 1948. The Fokker D.XXI was, in all cases, a footnote in Second World War history. With only 148 produced, it had a very limited impact globally. But when considering the Finnish-Soviet War of 1939, it was a fearsome opponent, achieving a kill ratio that could be described as being 1 to 10, although the number of losses suffered by the Soviet Union in this conflict are still in doubt. Analyzing the Winter War and what the Finnish Air Force achieved, we can see a clear example of superior training and organization wielding results even against an overwhelming numerical advantage. During the Continuation War, the Finns fell in love with another fighter considered obsolete everywhere else, the Brewster F-2A Buffalo, but this will be the topic for another video. In the end, the D.XXI could have seen an improved version if the Netherlands hadn't fallen, as there were ongoing plans to adapt the D.XXI to either a Rolls-Royce Merlin, a Bristol Hercules or a Daimler-Benz DB600 engine and a retractable landing gear. Finland did equip one D.XXI with a retractable landing gear, but found that it wasn't worthwhile. When it came to its appearance, it definitely was. Is the D.XXI an overlooked aircraft deserving more praise, or do the Finns deserve all the credit? Let me know your opinion in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and Happy New Year!